Our next speaker is a senior VP at Capgemini Consulting. One of his key jobs there is charting the digital transformation in a joint project with MIT and the Sloan School. His new book, Lead in Digital, written with George Westerman and Andrew McAfee, yes, that Andrew McAfee from MIT, explores how companies succeed or fail in harnessing digital change for their business. Please welcome Didier Bonnet.
Thank you. So, of course, I totally agree with John. You're being treated today because I'm the second consultant after John, and I'm not going to use any PowerPoint, and this is rare, believe me. So, my focus was more about looking at really businesses and the impact of this digital technology on businesses, and I totally agree with John, I think at least the last part of your speech, that one of the reasons why I don't worry too much about, and I'm an optimist, about the dark side today is because I don't think we have a choice, okay? What we're seeing today in the world of technology is a fundamental change in the way that we're going to conduct business. And the good or bad news, depending on how you look at it, it ain't going to stop. Okay, in fact, it's going to continue, and it's going to continue exponentially. So we better be ready, and that's why I really believe that this digital transformation, whatever we call it, is an imperative from every business leader. Now, let me backtrack a little bit. When we started to do this research with the MIT about 5 years ago, there were two things we saw wrong with the dialogue. The first one was, it seems to have been hijacked by a bunch of technology enthusiasts, and these people were really either running large or small technology companies, or they were startups with very high valuations, or they were just very loud commentators in Silicon Valley. And we looked at these industries and what they were talking about 99% was around software and publishing and media and music and all this kind of stuff. And if you run a small calculation, you'll realize this is about 6% of the world economy. So, and I love this industry because I come from these industries. So I'm really excited. But we have 94% of the economy that is not represented in this debate, or was not represented in this debate. So we decided to focus on that. And these are the people, who do manufacturing, who do pharmaceutical, who do banking or insurance or whatever, that actually power not only 94% of the economy, but also employ a hell of a lot of people. So I think we have to worry about this. So that was the first misconception. The second one is, I think there was too much focus on the beauty of the digital technology themselves. And I think that's not, to me, that's not defining. The important part is more around the digital transformation. So in other words, how do we integrate those technologies so they have an impact on business and also an impact for what John and I think Gary Hamel mentioned about how do we start changing those 100-years-old type of construct that we have in our organization. Okay, so the notion of transforming this kind of old-fashioned processes, corporation, organizational design function that we hate today, we have to start somewhere. And to me, the transformation is what it does. So we went out and talked to about 400 companies globally. Talk to their executive, talk to the people below in the organization. We looked at their performance, obviously. We looked at their initiative in terms of digital to try to understand how they were integrating this technology. And what we're really trying to find was, are they companies that actually go through this process not easily, but at least better than others. And the good news is that we did find some. And in the book, we call them digital masters. So people that are able to really start integrating these technologies for business benefit, but also start adapting their organization in very different ways than what we've been used to. The bad news is that there were few and far between. So it was not a majority by any stretch of imagination. So the obvious question is, okay, well, what is it they did differently? And the interesting part for me was they really approach all this transformation with a sort of a dual track. So there was obviously the track which we call digital capability, so the investment that you make in those technologies. So you have to go into mobile, social, analytics, and all this kind of stuff. So that's the obvious one. But there was a second track where they're really worried about what we call the leadership capabilities. How do I conduct my transformation within my organization? So how do I start changing those kind of 100-years-old things and practices that we have. And the two of them, and the digital masters basically are the people that were doing those two things very well. So when you look at what is it, so the digital capability is the obvious one, so I won't spend too much time. It needs investment, and I think as been mentioned earlier on, it's not just about productivity and efficiency, it's also about growth, it's also about reach, it's also about working differently. So there's loads of aspects to those kind of investments, but they're essential. The second part was really a little bit less obvious, and a lot of people actually didn't do it very well in those companies. But those who did were really focusing on how do I start changing the organization and developing this program so it has an impact on the way we work and how the organization competes. And there were many aspects, but 4 sort of stood out. The first one is we talk a lot about vision, and it is absolutely true that most of the companies that we put in the digital master category had strong leadership. And vision, I hate the word vision, by the way, but it's not, vision I don't mean that we go in a hotel for a weekend and we design a long vision of the next 5 years. Sometimes vision was like 2 or 3 words, but provide a direction to the company. And we saw a fabulous company, for instance, a company called Codelco, who was a Chilean government-owned mining company. So you wouldn't start there to look at digital transformation, but yet these guys are doing fabulous things where they're really completely reinventing mining. And it started with a simple fact that they couldn't get the best engineers to work in the mine because they wanted to be in Santiago. So they found a way to put some automation, but also some remote monitoring to actually be able to work remotely. And from there, started changing the whole economics of mining. And they didn't start with a roadmap. They started by having some form of vision, which was very simple, but then engage. And this is the second part, and I think this was mentioned at least twice yesterday, and I would put my layer on top of it. Engagement is just as essential as it used to be in the past, even more, I would say, in digital transformation. And engagement meaning, getting not just a small coalition, but the critical mass of people that starts to move the construct of your organization and start moving and changing things in the right way. And today we're kind of, we're in a great situation compared to where we were 20 years ago. Because 20 years ago, engagement was actually, particularly for a large global company, was actually a difficult thing to do because of remoteness. Today, with digital technology, we can actually engage at scale. Okay, we have video things, we have wikis, we have enterprise social networks, we have all these tools that are brilliant at engagement, provided you use them properly. And that's one of the mistakes we've seen, is that a lot of people actually don't use those tools to the point where it's not just about putting a tool, the tool doesn't matter. It's how do we start getting people to work differently, to collaborate differently, and then to scale the thing that work so you get the real benefit for your organization. So that's the second one. The third one was a really boring thing called governance. Because our organization are the way they are, if you let, and I think John knows that better than me because he actually mentioned that in a speech where I was at, is the large organizations have a tendency to sort of Pac-Man any new initiative or new innovation very, very quickly. And usually, it's like a self-defeating type of mechanism inside. And so the role of the structure of governance is really to beat that. And usually what it does is basically help the companies to start working across silos, collaborate in different ways, start getting different functions working together. And you need that because the benefits of digital transformation are when you start working across silos. So it's about sharing and cooperation. And sharing cooperation in large corporation is not a natural act. So you actually have to facilitate that. And the last point around what they were doing is really this notion of how the technology side of the business and the business side actually work together. And for years, we had IT departments having a virtual monopoly of technology in the organization. This is over, and we all know that. But nevertheless, it's how you weave those business and those IT capability together and work completely differently that make the difference. And we've seen it over and over again in all our digital masters. They're actually broken down this kind of relationship. And if you look at startups, they work completely differently in terms of meshing technology and business people. So those 4 aspects were quite essential. Now, does it make business sense? Yes, it does, because the digital masters that we measured, when we look at their performance, were actually much more profitable than the average of their peers in the same industry. So there is a financial benefit to do that. But I would say that the main benefit we've seen and we describe in the book was more around this notion of not changing from, we end up bureaucracy from day one, as Gary was advocating, but at least taking the first 2 or 3 steps of adapting those old organizational constructs to start moving into this new digital world. So that was essential. And also, those people that were doing that well was less frightened about the fact that technology was changing. Okay, so once you do it 2 or 3 times effectively, the fact that technology changed doesn't really matter, which is a good thing because it is going to change quite drastically. So I said I was a positive and an optimist onto the question of why it would, this digital technology are going to be an engine for prosperity, I believe, at least for large firms, because we've seen companies doing that extremely well. And second, that when you look at what they do well, it's not an arcane art. You can actually codify it. It doesn't mean it's easy, but you can at least codify it. So you don't need to hire, 20% of the best guys at Google's or spend 25% of your revenue in technology. You can actually start moving the organization if you follow a process that we've seen working well with this digital master. It's really around this two dimension and the dichotomy of change in those ways. So why I think this is essential, I started by saying, I think it's one of the main, or it should be on one of the main items on the agenda of every leader, is because, as I say, I don't think this pressure that you describe is going to stop anytime soon. In fact, it's going to get worse. So we as an organization have got to get ready to face those changes. And I think the one thing I would say is that I am absolutely not advocating replacing the managers by bureaucrats. So I don't absolutely believe for a minute, from what I've seen, at least in this research, that technocrats will be the new managerial leaders. It's not true. In fact, most of what we've seen was very human-centric organization. It was creating, by the way, digital was creating new problems, so the problems don't disappear, they're just different. But we did see, very sort of human-based type of organization, and I know we might talk about jobs later on. There are side effects to digital which are negative, and I think we have to face them. But I'm on the positive side of the equation, and I'd just like to finish by saying, despite the great bounty that we have in front of us as organization with digital transformation, it's not a given. So it's going to require work, and it's not destiny. And I think from what we've seen with the digital leaders, and the reason we call the book Leading Digital, I think the answer is in the title, it goes back to good old leadership. So it is kind of a paradox that when we're in a world where technology is so overwhelming, when we're seeing things that were science fiction 3 years ago, being normal today, at the end of the day, it's about the leadership and the managerial and the engagement of people that actually makes a difference and allow us to move to what we're all crying for, to start shifting the needle on these new type of organizations. I don't think we know today. I mean, we hear a lot about, the new digital business and digital enterprise being flat. There's no manager, there's no bureaucracy, there's no whatever. I don't think anybody knows what the shape of the future digital business is going to be, but we'll learn a hell of a lot more as we go along doing this digital transformation and see what the effect of that are for organization. And one, by the way, which I've seen over and over again, is the effect on middle management, which sometimes can be very disempowered. So we have to understand all that before we can start reshaping the future. But last message is really about us, and it's our destiny. We have to shape our destiny, basically, by leading those digital transformation. Thank you.